Starting off in our number 5 spot, atomic bomb. In 1945, the world was stunned by the arrival of the atomic bomb that was so destructive that it could wipe cities off the map and claimed lives in the hundreds of thousands. Some deaths occurring long after the bomb had been dropped on the nation of Japan. After a month, Japan was ready to surrender. While the Soviet Union played a big part in their decision to surrender, there was no debating that the United States had just cemented itself in there. Then word got around that the Soviet Union was working on developing their own bomb, and they weren't far from matching the power of the United States. Once it became apparent that the states wouldn't be able to hold on to the secret about the bomb forever, a terrible realization came over the world. For the first time in history, we had the power to end all life on Earth. And the planet's two greatest rivals both had their finger on the trigger. And hence, the doomsday clock was born. This was in the hopes that the world might realize just how close they were to absolute destruction. And it was set to a terrifying 7 minutes to midnight. In at number 4, Laki eruption. This Icelandic volcano erupted violently from 1783 to 1784. That's right, this volcano spewed lava for a full 8 months, which caused catastrophic global effects. The poisonous clouds filled with sulfuric acid and sulfur dioxide compounds that were expelled into the air. It also made temperatures drop 1.3 degrees below normal for 2 to 3 years following the eruption. It contaminated the soil, which in turn damaged crops across Europe, and led to the death of over 50% of Iceland's livestock population. This also caused droughts in India. It led to a deep famine and the eventual death of over 6 million people. This lava flow also destroyed 20 villages.
Number 3. Exercise Tiger. Exercise Tiger, or Operation Tiger, was a series of large-scale rehearsals for the D-Day invasion of Normandy 1944, in which the military's lack of communication resulted in friendly fire from an Allied convoy being destroyed by German submarines, resulting in the deaths of at least 750 Americans. Wow. Of the 2 ships assigned to protect the convoy, only one was present. The second ship that was supposed to be present had been in a collision, suffered damage, and had to be repaired in secrecy. Because Allies' naval headquarters were operating on different frequencies, the American forces did not know this, and the first practice assault took place and was marked by an incident involving friendly fire. They didn't know it was an exercise. Set for 7:30 a.m., it was to include live ammunition to acclimatize the troops to the sights, sounds, and smells of war. This followed an order made by General Dwight Eisenhower, who felt that the men must be hardened by exposure to real battle conditions. Several of the ships landing that morning were delayed until 8:30, an hour later, and some landing craft didn't even receive word of the change at all. Landing on the beach at their original scheduled time, the second wave came under fire, suffering an unknown number of casualties. Rumors circulated along the fleet that as many as 450 men were killed, and it remained in secrecy and classification memos for numerous years after. I've seen Saving Private Ryan, and I can only imagine what this site looked like. Number 2. The Manhattan Project. Nuclear fission by chemists in 1938 made the development of the atomic project a theoretical possibility. The Manhattan Project was a research and development exercise during World War II that produced the first nuclear weapons. It was led by the United States with the support of the United Kingdom and Canada. Nuclear physicist Robert Oppenheimer was the director of the Los Alamos laboratory that designed the actual explosives. The Army component's first headquarters were in Manhattan, hence the name, the place name, and the official code name. The project began in 1939 and employed more than 130,000 people and cost nearly $2 billion to fund. Research and production took place at more than 30 sites across the US, United Kingdom, and Canada. During 1939, physicists drafted the Einstein-Szilard letter, which warned of the potentials of this extremely powerful creation of a new type. They had it signed by Albert Einstein and delivered to President Roosevelt. In 1941, President Roosevelt approved the atomic program, and Roosevelt chose the Army to run the project rather than the Navy because the Army had more experience with large-budget scientific projects. Plutonium was then chemically separated from the uranium by scientists, and the Fat Man and Little Boy implosion weapons were created at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico. The first nuclear device ever detonated was the Trinity test, conducted at New Mexico's Alamogordo Range 1945. Little Boy and Fat Man explosives were used a month later in the atomic droppings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the immediate post-war years, the Manhattan Project conducted weapons testings, development of new weapons, promoted and supported medical research into radiology, and it maintained control over American atomic weapons research until the formation of the United States Atomic Energy Commission in 1947. Classified stuff, people. These were Very scary times. And coming in at number 1, the Philadelphia experiment. This one scares me, and I pray it really is a hoax because there's a lot of documents that relate to this subject around this time that don't really add up. The Philadelphia experiment was an alleged event witnessed by Carl Allen and the United States Navy shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in October 1943. Allen describes an experiment where the US Navy attempted to render itself invisible, cloaking the destroyer USS Eldridge, and the bizarre scientific events and results that followed. On Allen's account, the destroyer was successfully made invisible, but the ship inexplicably teleported to Norfolk, Virginia for several minutes and then reappeared back in the Philadelphia yard. The ship's crew was supposed to have suffered various side effects including insanity, intangibility, and being frozen in place. The story first surfaced in late 1955 when Allen sent a book full of handwritten letters referring to the experiment to a US Navy research organization. The US Navy maintains that no such experiment was ever conducted, that the details of the story contradict well-established facts about the USS Eldridge, and that the physics the experiments they're claiming to be based on doesn't even exist. What do you think? I think this actually happened and the gruesome details of the side effects are just misinformation. I don't know. I get a weird feeling about this one. Too many science experiments at that time.
Kicking us off at number 5, we have Blanc Manier. This image was taken shortly after the discovery of a woman trapped in a room for over 25 years. 25. Half of her entire life spent in one room. This was no accident either. Also known as the confined woman of Poitiers, Blanche was secretly locked in a small room by her status-obsessed mother. In 1874, when Blanche was 25, she wanted to marry an older lawyer. Being from a bourgeois family of old noble origins, her mother would not accept this. In order to keep her daughter away from marrying a supposedly penniless lawyer, she locked her in a dark room in the attic of their home. The family continued on living their daily lives, pretending to mourn the death of their captive sister. Imagine that, living out your life full well knowing that your poor sibling was tied to a bed upstairs, wasting away. Good lord. In 1901, an anonymous writer sent a letter to the Paris Attorney General letting them know about the spinster locked up in Madame Manier's house. When discovered, Blanche was emaciated and filthy. According to some sources, she had not seen sunlight since being locked up. Living in her own filth, she was barely 25 kilograms. Imagine the sloth killing from David Fincher's Seven and you'll start to understand what this was like. The police reported that she had been lying completely naked on a rotten straw mattress, covered in a crust of excrement, meat, vegetables, fish, and rotten bread. The stench was so terrible they had to suspend the initial investigation and come back later to look further. The mother was arrested and died 15 days later. She knew exactly what she was doing, but didn't expect to be caught. Good riddance. Coming in at number 4, we have Leonid Rabz. While on an expedition to the Antarctic, Russian surgeon Leonid Rabz started to feel awful. He was always tired, felt weak often, and couldn't shake a case of nausea. When he developed a sharp pain in his side, the medicine man knew what was happening. He had appendicitis. If left untreated, the swollen organ would kill him. Knowing they were far from civilization, Rabz made the ghastly realization that he was the only person on this expedition capable of performing surgery. He wanted to live, and if the doctor died in an expedition, the others would be in great danger. So he did what most medical professionals consider impossible. He performed an auto-appendectomy. He gathered some assistants, prepped his instruments, and began the procedure. If he were to lose consciousness, the helpers were instructed to inject him with adrenaline so he could keep going. Because of the nature of self-surgery, he couldn't apply a general anesthetic. It would just cloud his mind and limit his abilities. So he had to cut into himself and deal with that pain. Once past the abdominal wall, he had to move his intestines out of the way and remove his appendix with no other pain relief. In the end, the surgery was a success. The image of the procedure underway is haunting to say the least, with Rabz's open abdomen on full display. He actually performed much of the operation by touch, as the mirror he had planned on using to look inside ended up being more hindrance than help. Yikes.
Coming in at number 3, comets. So just having one comet hit the Earth is terrifying enough, but imagine hundreds of comets hurtling towards Earth. Yeah, that's pretty terrifying. Oh, and let's not forget the fun little fact that each of them is 1,000 times more powerful than an atomic bomb. With this thought in mind, you can probably somewhat imagine how terrified Mexican astronomer Jose Bonilla was in 1883 when he was looking through his telescope and saw more than 300 dark, unidentified, mysterious objects passing in front of the sun. Over the years, due to curiosity, this event was actually re-examined. which actually turned out to be a really bad idea, as a modern astronomer named Hector Mantarola then confirmed that this sighting was of a comet that had recently broken up and came as close to 400 miles away from Earth, which in space terms really isn't that far. Had it hit, it could have killed all life on our planet. Turns out the existence of our human race came down to just a bit further than the distance from New York to Pittsburgh. Yeah, this comet was that close to hitting our planet and destroying it. And at number 2, the Black Plague, aka Black Death, or the Great Plague. This was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. This wiped out anywhere from 50 to 200 million people between 1347 and 1351. This disease was ugly, it spread quickly, and it was believed to be spread by the fleas on rats. The plague arrived in Europe in October 1347, when 12 ships from the Black Sea docked at the Sicilian port of Messina. People gathered on the docks to greet the sailors, but they were met with a horrifying sight. Most of the sailors aboard the ships were dead. Those who were still alive were very sick and covered in black boils that oozed blood and pus. Sicilian authorities hastily ordered the fleet of death ships out of their harbor, but it was already too late. Over the next 5 years, the Black Plague killed millions of people in Europe, which equaled out to almost 1/3 of the country's population. Had this disease continued to spread, it could have taken out everyone on the planet. What's crazy is that this plague is still expected to be hanging around in some corners of the world, causing the deaths of 126 people as recently as 2013. Coming in at number 1, mass extinction. Did you guys know that technically the world has already ended 3 times? For example, about 450 million years ago when Earth's temperatures dramatically dropped, which created the Ice Age. And as we know, this ended up wiping out about 80% of all species on the planet. Then 250 million years ago, massive levels of volcanic eruption across the planet caused a lot of damage, basically wiping out 97% of all life. Then 66 million years ago, we all know about the asteroid that killed off the dinosaurs. And as scary as all of these events were, if they happened once, then they most certainly could happen again.
Number 5 on this list is the dancing plague of 1518. That's right guys, you heard that right. A plague about dancing. Honestly, I'd never heard of this before, and in my whole time working on this channel, this is actually the coolest and strangest thing that I've ever come across. So in Strasbourg, Alsace, which is now modern day France, in the year 1518, from July all the way to September, people just started dancing. For months, hundreds of people were dancing in the streets of France and they couldn't stop. It's said that one woman started dancing in the streets one day and then some more came and they just kept going for months with absolutely no reason at all. People started thinking that this was the cause of a demonic possession or some ghost that was making people lose their minds, but in actuality, nobody had any idea why these people were doing this. This wasn't a casual waltz either. These people were going hard. These people went so hard that they literally danced themselves to death. I can't possibly imagine going so hard at the club that I died, but that's basically what happened here with these people. There are actual claims that at one point in the heat of all this dancing, up to 15 people were dying per day just from dancing. This death kept happening and these people would continue dancing around all of these bodies. This plague went on until September when it just suddenly subsided, and that was that. No explanation, no reasoning behind it, they just went hard for several months and then stopped. That's why everyone thinks that something demonic has to be the cause of all this. Some people have speculated that food poisoning may have played some role, but that just doesn't make any sense to me because it went on for months. Seriously folks, please comment down below what you think about this or some theories about why this happened, because it has me pretty baffled. Number 4 on this list is the lost city of Atlantis. Atlantis is a city that is considered to be a utopian society in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It was first documented by Plato in 2 of his works, Timaeus and Critias. Now even though Atlantis is often referred to as a city these days, back then Plato described it as an island. This island was located in the Atlantic and was said to be pretty massive, bigger than Asia Minor and Libya combined. This island, or city, was extremely wealthy and had a surplus of resources. This is what led them to being considered a utopia and a highly advanced group. Now, Plato describes a great battle between these Atlanteans and the Athenians and says that after lots of hard fighting, the Athenians eventually prevailed in the war. Then, several massive earthquakes caused the earth to shift, and the entire island of Atlantis was swallowed up by the sea and now rests at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean somewhere. Many people have speculated on how accurate these tales from Plato are, with experts believing that this could just all be a myth. However, the legend of Atlantis started to circulate around Europe many years later, and people began searching for this lost city. Nobody has found it to this day, but that doesn't mean that it never existed. Maybe we're just thinking about it the wrong way. Some people have thought that this entire city of Atlantis could have been aliens coming down to Earth, and that potentially this island was never really an island to begin with. Plato does describe the society as being a utopia, and an explanation for that would be aliens that have far better technology than we do. Maybe when this island apparently disappeared, these aliens just left. Now that does beg the question, if they're so advanced, how on earth could the ancient Athenians beat them in a battle? Which I do think is a very fair point. I do believe that Plato and the people after him have exaggerated this story, and the full truth has probably been lost in history. But I also believe that this tale didn't just come out of nowhere, and something potentially paranormal could be at hand.
Coming in at number 3, we have a frozen Soviet soldier. This looks like an actual nightmare, like big The Shining vibes for sure. The story here is just as scary as the photo. In 1939, Finnish defenders would sometimes take fallen, frozen Russian soldiers and place them in the field, almost like human scarecrows. This photo is an example of that practice in action. The hope was that the frozen body would be seen as a guard at patrol and other soldiers would avoid that area. If they got close enough to see the reality of the situation though, these soldiers would be in for a scare. Some claim this is a form of psychological warfare, while others say it was just another deterrent. The Finns, defending land against almost 1 million Russians, had to fight guerrilla style in the Winter War. Being one of the coldest Finnish winters ever recorded, the cold caused massive losses. The amount of soldiers who froze to death is unknown, but we can see what the cold can do to a body in this picture. Not a way that anyone would want to go. Coming in at number 2, the smiling mad bomber. George Peter Metesky terrorized New York City for over a decade in the 40s and 50s by planting homemade explosives in all sorts of public places. He planted over 30 bombs, with 22 of them actually going off and injuring over a dozen people. The last thing you would want to see from such a violent and terrifying person is a goofy grin, but unfortunately that's exactly what we got. Following an investigation that made use of an early form of profiling, Metesky was put behind bars. The image captured of him smiling out at the photographer has horrified people ever since. And lastly, at number 1, we've got John Irving Bentley's leg. Just take a look at this picture and try to explain what happened. It doesn't make too much sense, does it? One human leg, slippers still attached, sticking out of a burned hole in the bathroom. His remains were discovered by meter reader John Gosnell, who had let himself into the house to check the meter in the basement. He smelled something odd and noticed a strange smoke, so he went upstairs to investigate. There he found the leg with the rest of Bentley's body reduced to ashes. There are many theories as to how this happened, with various explanations as to how the fire burned out without spreading further. The most popular cause of death is alleged spontaneous human combustion, fire without an apparent external source of ignition. Other explanations point to Bentley keeping matches on his person and wearing flammable clothing, but these theories have never been confirmed. Either way, it's hard to imagine what would cause a fire intense enough to burn a man down to nothing while staying controlled in one area. I don't want to go out on a limb here, but something doesn't seem right. Oh boy.
Coming in at number 5, Thomas Midgley Jr. This man is somewhat to blame for the absolute ludicrous gas prices right now. You'd be absolutely amazed what 50 bucks can get you, all about 9 feet. But this man isn't in charge of inflation, no. This man is the man who invented leaded gasoline. Invented in the early 1920s, chemist Thomas Midgley Jr. was working on some pretty cutting-edge chemistry. His task was to conjure a way to enhance automotive gasoline to reduce or eliminate the problem of engine knocking. TEL, or better known as tetrathiolide, was an additive mixed with gasoline to do exactly that. And on December 9th, Tommy here unwillingly and unknowingly created what is to be the most destructive, biodangerous chemical compound, slowly and efficiently destroying our atmosphere. Long story short, this guy created the world's worst pollutant known to us so far, lead. Lead is a naturally occurring metal found in Earth's crust. Its widespread use has resulted in aggressive human environmental contamination. Companies GM and Standard Oil formed the Ethyl Corporation shortly hereafter to produce TEL. The company's name was carefully chosen to avoid the use of the word lead. Yeah, don't just take it right out. right out. Of course, shortly after its production, workers began suffering what would become lead poisoning, which resulting, not long after it opened, workers at the ethyl plant began suffering from poisoning, which in 1922, the US Public Health Service warned of the dangers of lead production and leaded fuel. However, the phase out of leaded gasoline wasn't officially banned until about 1996, and even in some places the early 2000s. It is estimated that 7 million tons of lead were released into the atmosphere from gasoline in the United States alone, and due to its popularity and production rate since the 1920s, it has been estimated by scientists that its result on the Earth accounted for about 900,000 deaths and about 22 million years of healthy life lost. I am not making a bold statement here and saying that this man shouldn't have been born. Maybe he could have been like a pilot or something, or a dentist. I don't know. Number 4. Gottlieb Kirchhoff. If you're anything like me and are addicted to the sweeter side of life, well then this one's for you. Seems like our boys here have something in common, but trying to find a solution actually led to creating something way worse. Gottlieb Kirchhoff was a German-Russian chemist who, through the use of his pharmacy, accidentally invented one of the world's worst things for you. The bittersweet part is that it's sugar. Well, high fructose sugar actually. Basically the thing that makes everything taste good. From sody pop to candy. Fructose, or high fructose corn syrup, is made by diluting cornstarch with hydrochloric acid? Excuse me, can I have the hydrochloric acid on the side? I actually just got a root canal. Yeah, thank you. But the bittersweet part comes from the effects. See, this guy had no idea the impact of his tasty formula would have on the body. Basically, this stuff is in everything we eat and drink. To give you some numbers, kills about 1 million people a year. And I'm lowballing. Messes up our body, regulates our energy levels, and is responsible for the diabetes crisis and one of the leading causes of death from disease for humans. That's not so sweet. Next time you eat or drink anything, just look at the label. See what's in it. This guy thought he was doing us all a favor, making things tastier, making things deadlier, dude. I tried to mix this list up a bit instead of repeating main players we know who've created or been responsible for all the atrocities, and I chose Kirchhoff to be on this list for the impact that he would have on the future. I'm looking at the long game here. And if this guy wasn't born, then we probably could have avoided this breakthrough chemical discovery. And unless I'm Kyle Reese from The Terminator, we'll never know.
Number 3 on this list is the Coral Castle. The Coral Castle is a limestone structure located in Florida. It is super unique and has these strange limestone rocks that have been carved into various figures. Now, there's nothing inherently cursed about this place. However, similar to the pyramids or Stonehenge that we covered in our last video, people wonder how on earth this place was made. Edward Leeds Scallon was a self-taught Russian engineer who came to America. He lived from 1887 to 1951 and is credited with being the creator of the Coral Castle. What's absolutely crazy about this story, though, is he constructed the structure all by himself. This is what baffles people to this day. How on earth is it possible that one man in the early 1900s was capable of moving these limestones and carving them the way that they are single-handedly? These stones weigh thousands of pounds, and there's no way that a man would ever be able to lift these things with sheer strength. Now, he was an engineer, and people have speculated that it was potentially the use of magnetism, something that he was fascinated with in his life. When asked how he was able to do this, he replied, "I understand the laws of weight and leverage, and I know the secrets of the people who built the pyramids." This kind of makes sense, but with the pyramids, they had thousands of people working on them all at once. You were only one man. People have theorized that Edward actually had some supernatural abilities that he was hiding from the public. This could honestly be believable because his personality was apparently extremely eccentric and very strange. However Edward was able to construct the Coral Castle, it truly is remarkable. Number 2 on this list is the oldest ghost story of all time. Ever wonder when all this started? When did humans start believing in ghosts, or when did we have our first encounter with a poltergeist? Well, a 3,500-year-old tablet may have the earliest depiction of a ghost as we know them today. This is a small tablet that was made in ancient Babylon and is considered by some experts to be one of the first, if not the first, written depiction of a ghost. The ghostly drawings could be easily missed, and you have to really pay attention if you're going to see it. An expert on the subject, Irvin Finkel, says, "You'd probably never give it a second thought because the area where the drawings are looks like it's got no writing, but when you examine it and hold it under a lamp, those figures leap out at you across time in the most startling way. The tablet goes into detail on how to get rid of ghosts and calls for an exorcist. It explains how this exorcist must make figurines of a man and a woman, and also speak the words of Mesopotamian god Shemesh to get rid of the ghost. There's also a warning to the reader to not turn around, potentially an indicator that a ghost could be behind you, or you could risk getting sucked into the underworld if your focus isn't steady. This tablet also lists a bunch of materials that can be used in rituals and that can be used to prevent ghosts from appearing in the first place. This is super interesting because it means that ghosts and spirits visiting the living can be traced all the way back to the ancient Mesopotamians. We were having paranormal events happen to us thousands of years ago, and the action of exorcising demons and ghosts, it all started with these guys. One could argue that they were the founders and innovators of a lot of our ghostly practices and knowledge to this day. Number 1 on this list is Oak Island. Oak Island is a very mysterious island that has been shrouded in lore for years. It's a privately owned island off the south shore of Nova Scotia, Canada. It has so many rumors surrounding it that it's even got its own television show called The Curse of Oak Island that has 8 seasons under its belt. This is a reality television show by the History Channel where they explore the mysteries of Oak Island, and considering they're on season 8, it's fair to say that there have been quite a few mysteries. The one that's gained the most international fame, though, is the Money Pit. The Money Pit is supposedly a place on Oak Island where there's a plethora of buried treasure waiting for somebody to dig it up. This treasure was left by the pirate Captain William Kidd, who lived from 1645 to 1701. There's said to be vast riches here, however no one's been able to find it up until this point. This is largely because finding buried treasure can be extremely difficult, but also due to the curse that surrounds it. The curse that hovers over this treasure states that 7 men will die in search of the treasure before it's found. To this day, there have actually been 6 deaths associated with this buried treasure. That means that if one more person was to die whilst they're looking for it, then the treasure would either reveal itself, or the next person who goes looking for it would be the one who finds it. Problem with this is that there's one more person who needs to die, and I don't think that anyone wants to be that unlucky number 7. Other than this pirate treasure, there's also rumored to be some extremely valuable and mystical items here. Never before seen Shakespearean plays, the Holy Grail, and the Ark of the Covenant have all been linked to Oak Island. If searching for cursed treasure is your cup of tea, and this is definitely the place for you.
Starting off this countdown, we have Julia Brown. Julia Brown was a well-known voodoo practitioner and witch in her small town in Louisiana. People knew her for her charms and her curses, as well as the creepy songs that she would sing on her porch with her guitar. In her community, people would come to her and she would perform a number of different rituals for them. That was until people started to take advantage of her, so she started to get back at them. When they came to her, she would scare them by telling them predictions like they're gonna die soon or bad things were coming for them. Then the locals were like, "Hey, what's going on with her?" Close to her death, Julia started to act strange. She would constantly sing songs about her death and how she would get revenge on the town. One song that she would sing goes as so: "When I die, I take the whole town with me. When I die, I take the whole town." Not a very cheery and upbeat song if you ask me. In fact, no one knew what she was talking about until the day that she passed away. On September 29, 1952, Julia passed away. On that day, the town came together for her funeral. Well, as they were lowering her casket into the ground, rain came down hard. This rain later turned into a disastrous hurricane that wiped out the entire town. So it's believed that before she left, she put a curse on the town, which is what she meant by "when I die, I'm taking the whole town with me." Over the years, a number of people have attempted to rebuild the town, but every time they do, it ends up getting destroyed again. Maybe her curse is real then. In our 4th spot today, we have Gerald Gardner. Gerald Gardner is often called the father of modern witchcraft, and that's due to the fact that he founded Wicca. Although technically he learned it from a group of people and then went on to just write about it, so they gave him credit for it. But anyways, basically back in 1939 he said that one night he encountered a group of women who claimed to be witches. They stripped him of his clothes and put him in the middle of a ceremonial circle. The circle was lined with naked women, and they showed him their ways. From there, he learned briefly about Wicca and thought, hey, this is great, let's preserve this and make sure that everyone knows about it. In 1954, he actually created a book titled Witchcraft Today that teaches others how to embrace Wicca fully. He then went on and became obsessed with the occult. In fact, it's believed that a number of Wiccans and pagans were saved partly because of him. They could come out and be like, yeah, I'm a witch, without fear of being hanged or burned alive. To this day, he's one of the most relevant witches in history, but also one of the more controversial ones.
Number 3, Alfred Nobel. We're sort of seeing a pattern here. These people had somewhat of a good intention that later turned out to be not so good, which led us to even asking, were they even supposed to be born at all? Cruel, but food for thought. Alfred Nobel was a Swedish chemist, engineer, inventor, and philanthropist, and known for having sacrificed his entire fortune to establish the Nobel Prize, holding 355 patents of his own in his own lifetime. Smarty pants. Nobel's most famous invention? Dynamite. A safer and easier way of harnessing the explosive power of nitroglycerin. That sentence in itself is hilarious. And in 1867, it would soon be used worldwide for mining and infrastructure development, and oh yeah, pretty much blowing anything and everything up ever since. And of course, let's not forget the impact of dynamite's effect on a person, place, or thing in its vicinity. We've all seen the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons. And this guy invented it. Dynamite. The stick, wick, and patented chemical compound was harnessed to do exactly that. And if we've read anything at all, it did a lot of bad. First off, how do you exactly tinker and tailor with an explosion? What happens when you can't crack the code? He's just in his basement like messing around with vials. Just a little bit more of that, little bit of this, and get down! The fact that this man did not blow himself up in any of these experiments is beyond me, and not only was this invention a new form of mass energy, in fact the Nobel Prize was created and named after him. He was the first. This invention and contribution was so ahead of its time in chemistry that it revolutionized the need to push evolution ahead through science. Its creation in itself is history for mankind. The dichotomy alone. Had this man known about all the cliche train track damsel in distress westerns that would have been parodied of his destructive invention, I don't know if he would have invented it in the first place. What do you think? Number 2, the Angel of Death. Okay. This guy definitely had it coming for sure with this list. The Angel of Death was a nickname given to this person for the disturbing amount of research he had collected via his specific scientific experiments. Why I think he shouldn't have been born at all is because to attain such groundbreaking information about the human body and its extremes, experiments needed to be run and not hypothesized. Joseph Mengele was a SS officer, doctor, and German scientist during World War II, and resulted in the leading of research closely related to the extremes and limitations of the capability of the human body, via DNA, via manipulation, and disease prevention, immunization, you name it. Any effect on the human body and its environment around them. I'm not going to get into what this person concocted up in his time as a medical captain, nor am I really going to make any jokes. This person pushed scientific research through the use of cruelty and pure evilness. Plain and simple. I don't like glorifying these people in these lists, and I can barely stand saying some of their names out loud. We know all of these people. Though the actual number of people's lives countlessly lost due to this man's sick fascination with pushing research and his scientific envelope hasn't been officially documented, these experiments were responsible for the deaths of somewhat of 6 million innocent lives. It is very clear that this person's intent was to derive violence, fear, and cruelty from day one, which I myself wish this person was never born. Crimes against humanity. No good. And number 1, nuclear fission. J. Robert Oppenheimer was an American theoretical physicist and was director of the Los Alamos Laboratory during the Manhattan Project, responsible for the research and creation of the very first atomic bomb. He is often known as the father of the atomic bomb, and his research in 1945 with nuclear fission, the result of smashing atoms into each other with a mass energy containment resulting in a massive explosion. A massive explosion, and that is an understatement. Just Google mushroom cloud. Scientists first developed nuclear technology during World War II. Thankfully, atomic bombs have been used only twice in war, both times by the United States, at the end of World War II in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Fat Man and Little Boy were the official names given to the two explosive devices. Charming. What makes this so terrifying is that due to this research, the act of war and the structure of battles are now a thing of prehistoric past. The mass execution that these inventions can do is nuclear. Literally. I put Oppenheimer at the top of this list because the devastation alone due to the future with merely the technology surfacing is detrimental in itself. This is actually the first time reports that a visitor from another galaxy started. These explosions were so giant that its effect could be felt off planet. Yo, that's next level. Aliens just pulling up.
Yeah, that's not really good, you know.
If there was a time in the future which we could send back AI, it would probably be due to this stuff. Oppenheimer was awarded the Medal of Merit from President Harry Truman in 1946 for the push in science, even if its push was in the wrong direction. All these people given awards, it's like, hey, good job. It's terrible stuff, but cheers.
Kicking off at number 5, The Witch's Well. And whilst Europe as a whole has had a long tragic line of witch hunting throughout its long and bloody history, there is perhaps one location in Scotland that exemplifies that period more so than any other. Edinburgh Castle is a hive of activity, a beautiful structure that speaks of the city's ancient roots and its mystical origin, but as you walk around its high walls, you'd may be amiss to know that you're walking amongst the same ground of a brutal and horrifying massacre that stretched out over a century. Now, the Witch's Well, a cast iron fountain and plaque, honours the Scottish people who were burned at the stake at Edinburgh Castle between the 15th and 18th centuries. But it was the 16th century, and one king in particular, where the Witch's Well saw more bloodshed than anywhere else in Scotland. King James VI and I of Scotland and England respectively was certainly an intriguing figure throughout British history, but it was his unique brand of zealotry that led to the deaths of thousands of innocent women, each of them without a trial. King James believed that witchcraft was a form of Satanism, and that anyone who possessed the abilities that he perceived as mystical, be it herbology or even dancing, were in fact possessed by the devil himself. You see, King James was obsessed with the notion of witchcraft and would write countless literature about demonology, but all of this culminated in a period that ran throughout the 17th and 18th centuries at Edinburgh Castle. As a result, more than 4,000 alleged witches, nearly all of them female, were mercilessly put to death. In fact, so many of them were brutally murdered that the usual act of burning at the stake was replaced with routine hanging, the last of which took place in 1728. During this horrifying satanic panic, pretty much anyone and everyone could be unrightfully accused of practicing black magic. Many of those that were killed were keen herbalists demonstrating an ancient practice of medicine. Some of them were mentally ill and wrongfully deemed possessed, and even rarer, some of those killed were merely on the wrong end of someone else's malice, murdered over a squabble. It was a brutal time not only in Scottish history but the entirety of the British Isles, and the Witch's Well at Edinburgh Castle stands as a monument, a mortal reminder of those vile deeds. Swinging in at number 4, Skara Brae. And to be honest, I just love saying that name, Skara Brae. Skara Brae. Feels good under the tongue, right? Well, the thing is, for this entry on our list, we're going to be going back pretty far. In fact, further back than any other entry in Scottish history, and perhaps even further back than any other historical instance imaginable, really. Skara Brae is a location far, far older than Stonehenge and far older than even the Great Pyramids of Giza themselves, and it's tucked on a series of little islands just off the coast of Scotland, Orkney. Europe's most complete ancient Neolithic village, which, whilst being completely and utterly amazing in itself, may also be evidence of a far more terrifying event than any of us could have ever imagined. You see, there is a reason why Skara Brae is often called the Scottish Pompeii, because although it is remarkably preserved in a similar fashion to the ancient Italian volcanic city, it also seems to be evidence of a similar sort of disaster. Back in the winter of 1850, a severe storm battered Scotland, causing immense damage to the populace and over 200 deaths. In the Bay of Scale within the Orkney Isles, the storm stripped away a mass of earth, and when the storm cleared, the nearby villagers were astounded to find the outline of an ancient village. Although the local Laird William Watt of Scale conducted an excavation, it wasn't until 1927 that the actual location was fully excavated, which would take another 60 or so years to be completed. Originally, it was thought that the site was from around 500 BC, but when radiocarbon samples were fully tested, it was revealed that Skara Brae was built by at least 3180 BC. Now, as there is evidence of the inhabitants of Skara Brae being taken by surprise and fleeing the site in a hurry, such as remains of choice meats being cooked on the fire left behind, and evidence of one woman fleeing in such haste that her necklace broke as she tried to squeeze through the narrow doorway of her home. Now, while Skara Brae is still very much a mystery, the leading theory is that the disaster in question was another equally terrifying storm, the same kind that unearthed it in 1850. If that's the case, I think we should be on the lookout for a storm.
In our third spot today, we have Mother Shipton. Mother Shipton, otherwise known as Ursula Sonthiel, was born in 1488 England. Legend has it that she was born during a massive thunderstorm and her mother gave birth to her in a cave. Her mother was only 15 at the time and was stuck raising Ursula in that cave by herself. That was until the monastery took her mother in and a local family took Ursula in. Eventually her mom was taken to a nunnery and they never saw each other again. Growing up, Ursula had a hard time fitting in. She had a large crooked nose, her back had a bend in it, and her legs were twisted. So right off the bat, people were like, yeah, she's a witch, just because of her appearance. In fact, people would bully her and call her hag face. Others believed her father was the devil. It didn't help that her mom refused to tell anyone who the father of her child was. So people were like, yeah, for sure, her father's the devil. Not only that, she would spend a lot of time by the cave that she was born in. Now, how did she get the name Mother Shipton? Well, eventually she went on to marry a man named Tobias Shipton, and she took his last name. She eventually did partake in witchcraft and would make magical remedies for the sick. So people called her Mother Shipton because she was like a mother to all. At one point in her life, she became psychic and could see into the future. Soon after, she was called the Narrenborough Witch. She made a living off of predicting and sharing the future with others. Moving on to number 2, we have Isabelle Godie. Isabelle Godie was a Scottish woman from Aldern, a village near the Scottish Highlands. She is well known in history because in 1662 she confessed to witchcraft and may have been executed. We actually don't know because there's no official record of it, so it's a mystery. Basically, during that time, if you were thought to be a witch, they would torture you until you admitted to being one, even if you weren't actually one. Well, Isabelle's case sparked a lot of interest because she admitted to being a witch willingly without torture or anything. And she went into great detail on everything that she was doing. She gave 4 separate confessions given over a 6-week period. For example, she said she made a pact with the devil and had been engaging in intercourse with him. She also said that she was part of a coven and would cast spells on the community. She claimed she put a curse on some male authority figures who she felt victimized by. She also cursed her landlord for being a pervert and put one on the local church minister. Lastly, she also admitted that she had the ability to turn into animals and that she was interacting with fairies. Over the centuries, a number of people have analyzed Isabelle and have come up with some explanations for her actions. One is that she suffered from psychosis or hallucinations, whereas others think it was a ploy to get maybe a more lenient sentence. But of course, you still have the people who believe that she was an actual witch and did everything that she admitted to doing. And in our number 1 spot today, we have La Voisin. Catherine Montvoisin, or La Voisin, was a witch that lived in France in the mid-1600s. Her witchcraft mainly comprised of mixing and creating potions, poisons, and medicines. She also would tell people their fortunes and would hold black masses where people could come and make contact with the devil through her. It started off with her just providing palm readings and advice for people, but then she realized that her clients were mainly women who were coming to her with spousal problems. A number of them wanted their husband dead, so she started creating the potions to help them kill their husbands and gain fortune. Then things started to get darker and darker. She began practicing dark magic and witchcraft. This involved her leading a number of satanic rituals in the catacombs under her home. One time she even spilt the blood of an innocent victim as a sacrifice for the devil. Eventually, Catherine was arrested for practicing witchcraft and for being involved in a number of murders. She was publicly burned at the stake in 1680.
Number 5. The Wow signal. In a 1959 paper, Cornell University's physicists had speculated that any extraterrestrial civilization attempting to communicate with radio signals might use a frequency of 1420 MHz, which is naturally emitted by hydrogen, the most common element in the universe. In 1973, after completing an extensive survey of extragalactic radio sources, Ohio State University assigned the Big Ear to the scientific search for extraterrestrial intelligence famously known as SETI. Giant dish. Think Jodie Foster in Contact. 1977, Jeremy Amon, a SETI volunteer astronomer, was analyzing by hand large amounts of data processed by an old IBM computer. He spots a series of signal intensities and frequencies that left him and his colleagues astonished. The Wow signal was the first radio signal detected from Earth. The signal came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. Amon discovered the anomaly a few days later while reviewing the recorded data. Impressed by the result, on the computer printout he circled 6EQUJ5 and wrote 3 letters beside it. Wow. leading to the event's famous name. The signal lasted for the full 72-second window during which Big Ear was able to observe it, but has not been able to detect it since, despite several attempts by Eamon and others. It remains, as 2020, the strongest candidate for an extraterrestrial radio transmission ever detected. To this day, nobody can explain the signal, even though many have tried, claiming it could have just come from us. I don't know. What do you think? Number 4. Harvard's Psilocybin experiments. Operation Midnight Climax, 1954, consisted of a series of CIA-run safe houses and what went on inside them in San Francisco, California, and New York City. In 1960, two psychologists, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, ordered psilocybin from a Swiss company named Sandoz, with the intention to test if different administration modes lead to different experiences. They believed that psilocybin could be the solution for the emotional problems of the human brain. The first test group was 38 people of various backgrounds. 167 subjects in total participated in the study, willing or unwilling. In 1961, Leary decided to orient the study towards psilocybin mushrooms and the rehabilitation of prison inmates. The San Francisco safe houses were closed in 1965, and the New York City safe houses soon followed in 1966. Operation Midnight Climax and Project MK Ultra were considered to be so secretive that few people, even of the highest government positions, knew of their existence. Midnight Climax being a sub-project of MK Ultra's The Mind Control research program that began in the late 1950s by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was a chemist of the CIA. Unlike Project Artichoke, Operation Midnight Climax gave Gottlieb permission to test drugs on unknowing citizens, which made way for the legacy of this operation. Hundreds of federal agents, field operatives, and scientists worked on these programs before they were shut down in the mid-1960s. Science or sinister?
Next up at number 3, the Massacre of Glen Co. And this one in particular has been immortalised in countless fictional works, paying homage to a terrifying and bloodthirsty event in Scottish history. But as is the case with many things, the truth of this historical instance is full of far more horror than in fiction. Now, the Jacobite uprising was a particularly complex and brutal time in the history of the British Isles, but the worst of it culminated in the Scottish Highlands. After losing the throne of England and Scotland to William III in March of 1689, after landing in Ireland in an attempt to regain the throne, James II and VII recruited a small force of Highlanders to support him in his campaign through Scotland. Now, it's important to note that many Scottish clans have remained loyal to King James, the most profound of which were the MacGregors, the Keppoch MacDonalds, and of course the Glen Co MacDonalds. And keep that name in mind. You see, the thing is, in August of 1691, the government had offered an indemnity to all Scottish chiefs, as long as they swore an oath of allegiance before New Year's Day, January the 1st, 1682. In total, the Secretary of State at the time, Lord Stair, offered a total of £12,000 British pounds for swearing their allegiance to King William, which, as you may imagine, was quite the allure for many other Jacobite-leaning chieftains. On top of that, letters of fire and sword were sent out authorising savage attacks on anyone that would not comply to the order, and interestingly enough, it worked. Pretty much all of the Scottish chiefs took the oath. However, Chief Alexander MacDonald of Glen Co wasn't so sure, and he had postponed his submission of the oath until December 31st, 1691. You see, at the time he was hosting 120 men of the Earl of Argyll, and he wouldn't be able to make it to the nearest magistrate at Fort William until January the 6th. Hearing that news, King William ordered swift punishment to the MacDonalds, and the next moment, over 100 of the Earl's soldiers, who had been quartered amicably at Glen Co for more than a week, suddenly turned and attacked the MacDonalds mercilessly. 33 men, 2 women and 2 children were slaughtered by their own guests, who had been fed and watered and entertained without a second thought. And now we can sort of understand the importance of hospitality, can't we? Hopefully. Coming in at number 2, the Black Dinner. And if that previous entry sounds like something straight out of Game of Thrones, then that's because George R.R. Martin was pretty damn inspired by British history, particularly the history of Scotland. And while this one instance in particular may well seem pretty damn familiar, but that also doesn't make it any less terrifying, because like I said, history is far more horrifying than fiction, because the Black Dinner actually happened. Let's take it back to the year of 1440, a tumultuous time in Scottish history during the reign of King James II, who was just 10 years old at the time. You see, Scotland was under the shaky yet tentative power sharing regent rulership of 2 men, Sir Alexander Livingston and Sir William Crichton. It was the second period of regency in a short space of time after King James I was also briefly under the same sort of stewardship. You see, one of those previous regent stewards was a man named Archibald Douglas, 4th Earl of Douglas, who was an all-around pretty decent guy, so much so that in this story you could consider him to be Ned Stark. You see, by the 15th century, the Douglases had become so powerful and damn honourable that some schemers such as Livingston and Crichton saw their family as a threat to the stability of the nation. In 1440, the grandson of Archibald, the 16-year-old William Douglas, 6th Earl of Douglas, was invited to Edinburgh Castle for a spectacular feast alongside his younger brother, David. The two of them were invited to dine beside the 10-year-old King James II, and on November 24th, 1440, the small Douglas entourage had arrived. According to legend, the banquet was held in the Great Hall of Edinburgh Castle, and the young king was completely enamoured by the charming and noble Douglases. At the end of the feast though, after the hall went silent, the head of a black bull was brought out on a platter and paraded in front of them. Under ancient Scottish custom, the head of a black bull was the symbol of death, and in rare customary moments, this formality presaged the death of the principal guests of a feast. As the legend goes, King James II was alleged to have pleaded for the lives of his new friends and for the Douglases to be spared, but it is said that his pleas fell on deaf ears, even as king. Both William Douglas and David Douglas were beheaded in front of the then 10-year-old king. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Sony Bean. Because talking of dinner, we certainly can't make this list without featuring perhaps the most notoriously grim instance of folklore in Scottish history, the legend of Sony Bean. Now also, whilst this entry is potentially the most gruesome in the whole of Scottish history, it's also important to note that not all of the legend of Sony Bean can be historically verified, and the vast majority of it is resigned to the whisperings of folklore. It's just food for thought. Sorry, I'll stop talking about food now. You see, little is known about the early life of the notorious Sony Bean, but it is said that he may have been born in East Lothian sometime in the late 16th century. When he reached adulthood, he became a ditch digger, but it seemed that the life of honest labour was not for him. He left home with a, and I quote, a vicious woman named Agnes Douglas, who apparently shared Sony's inclination for ferocity after being accused of being a witch. On the way, they'd rob anyone that crossed their path, and this is where their first taste for a far more sinister crime began to establish itself. It is said that on the road, Sony and Agnes cannibalized one of their victims. Eventually, the couple settled in a coastal cave, a place hidden just beneath Banay Head between Girvan and Ballantrae, where they lived undiscovered for over 25 years. As the legend goes, the cave that they made their home was 200 yards deep, and the entrance was completely blocked by water during high tide. And if that sounds like the perfect place to establish an incestuous tribe of cannibals, then that's because it was. You see, Bean and Agnes produced 8 sons, 6 daughters, 18 grandchildren, and 14 granddaughters, the majority of which were the produce of incest between their children. At the height of their terrifying reign, the Bean clan would carefully lay ambushes on the nearby road at night to rob and murder individuals or small groups. Their bodies, stripped and picked clean, would be brought back to the cave where they were eaten. Leftovers were pickled in barrels or dried like jerky. One night, however, after trying to ambush a newly married couple, the Bean clan met their match, and the young groom fought them with a pistol and sword in combat. Eventually, their secret cave was routed, and the Bean clan was captured and executed. Now, the actual details of which are down to wild speculation, but one thing is for certain: the cannibal clan of Sony Bean was said to have murdered and eaten over 1,000 victims. Oh, and also one version of the legend states that the tribe were never actually captured, and the nearby townsfolk were too terrified to go into the cave, so they just blew it up with dynamite. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like a sequel to me.